my name is Beck and welcome to a book talk for Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. And this book talk is going to contain spoilers, so this is your warning. If you don't want to get spoiled on this book, then definitely check out my description below. I'm going to have a couple of videos where I've talked about Aurora Rising already with their timestamps down there, so if you're here to see my thoughts about Aurora Rising and don't want to know what happens at the end, then don't watch this video. It's not the video for you. Check out my description below. Aurora Rising is the first book in a new sci-fi young adult trilogy by Amy and Jay, and the tagline for this trilogy is, "They're not the heroes we deserve, they're just the ones that we could find. Nobody panic." This is a multiple perspective book, and the characters in this book are Tyler, Ori, which is Aurora on the front cover, Scarlet, Cal, Zila, Kat, and Finian. The year in this book is also 2380, so it's far in the future, it's far away in a different galaxy, and the humans have formed a shaky kind of trust between different species in this book, so that war hasn't actually broken out across these species. From the introduction of Aurora though, this is potentially going to all go up in flames, and we're not quite sure how she's going to stop the truce from existing or how she's going to tip the balance into favouring war instead of the shaky truth that's already been established. I believe it's going to have something to do with the conspiracy that they're trying to cover up in this book, because Aurora has actually spent 2 centuries in a cryo-sleep kind of state. So because she spent all this time in a cryo-sleep, somehow the name of her mission and all of the people that she was in a colony with and the planet that she was going to this mission for somehow don't exist, and she does not know why. It has been completely wiped from everybody's records. There's also an organisation called the GIA. The GIA in this series are kind of like the police force. They enforce the law alongside the students and the soldiers at Aurora Academy, but for some reason they seem to want to kill the crew that we are getting acquainted with in this book, because the crew witnessed a murder of a colony of people. These people that were murdered weren't actually soldiers like the crew believed, and because they witnessed this murder, the GIA wants to cover it all up, and this means potentially killing the crew as a result. So that's kind of the plot of this book. It's kind of where it is leading, and during this we're kind of getting used to all the different perspectives in this and getting used to meeting all of the different characters. So first off, I want to jump into a few of the things that I disliked about this book, and then after that I'll talk about the things that I liked about this book, and then of course I'll talk about my concluding thoughts. Unfortunately, the beginning of this book did not hook me as much as I thought it would, and that's just because the balance felt slightly off. There were a lot of jokes and a lot of one-liners and quips at the beginning, and that definitely got me interested, but I've come to expect that with Amy and Jay's writing. It's often quite humorous. But at one point at the beginning, a character named Finian is telling Cal that he can't be the comic relief in this book because Finian already has that quota covered. So it was a cool breaking of the fourth wall, but it's jokes like these in a dire situation, like when the crew realizes they're potentially going to get killed for witnessing that mass murder, it kind of took away from the seriousness and the tension of the moment. And that happened in the first third or so of the book. While I do like humour, I just think that it was a little bit heavy at the very beginning, and like I said, it took away from the seriousness and the tension that the plot could be building. But I also understand that we're trying to get used to the characters and their different voices and how they balance each other out in the crew as well. So I don't want to say it was a mess, but I just couldn't connect with it because there was so much going on at the very beginning, and I found it hard to settle and figure out the seriousness of the tone as well as the characters who were interacting with each other. I just found it a little bit hard to adjust to at the beginning because there was so much happening, there was so many jokes going back and forth, and the situation didn't really seem to match the level of jokes that were going ahead. So that was a little bit off-putting for the beginning of the book for me. Another thing I disliked about this is that there is also going to be a pairing off of couples, or at least there appears to be. I don't necessarily dislike this trope or this pattern as a whole. I like how Amy and Jay are doing it so far, but this is a trope that I don't really like. It's the reason that I stopped reading the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. All of the characters seem to just get together and pair off, and then they kind of form little bubbles by themselves, and they're not really that interesting. But the way that Amy and Jay are doing it in this book with their 7 characters made me interested in each character individually, as well as how they interacted with the character that they're seeming to get paired off with, as well as the crew overall, because the crew obviously have different skill sets that are integral to the running of their ship, so they need to interact with each other. So I think that's where that pattern is going to differ. But if the characters do all end up getting together at the end of the book, I don't know how I'm going to feel. It depends on how it's done, but it's not usually something that I like to see in necessarily a young adult book. But I also like my chosen family tropes, and I like everyone being friends and forming kind of a trust bond, and that can't really happen if they're already forming relationships. I think it's a little bit fast for me. Another thing I disliked was the escape scene. So the escape scene was built up to quite a lot when they're going to steal an artifact artifact that Aurora has seen in a vision. But to get this artifact, they have to break into this really rich alien's place while he's throwing a party, and it seems like something that's going to be really fun, and there's a lot of build up to it, and it was really interesting and it was dangerous, but the way that it concluded with a potential betrayal in the mix was really, really fast. It happened in a couple of pages and they were resolved and out of the bad situation. When there was a third or half of the book build up to this moment, it seemed like a really quick way to close out the middle part so we can move on to the last part, which is definitely my favorite part of the book. I think the second part of the book, or the part surrounding this robbery, could have been a lot more integral and interesting to me had the conclusion of it been drawn out a little bit more. That said though, the pinnacle of the book wasn't really the robbery, that was just kind of a stepping stone into the ending of the book, so I understand why it was glossed over or it was resolved fairly quickly, because they were in a fast-paced environment, they were needing to make an escape really quickly, and a bunch of plot things had to kind of align really well and really quickly in order for them to escape. So I understood that it was done quickly, I knew what was going on, that wasn't lost on me, the pace of the book wasn't affected whatsoever. It's just my personal preference, I wanted it to have a little bit more of an effect over a couple of chapters rather than being resolved and kind of doing a 180 within the one chapter. Linking to this robbery, at the beginning of the book, or closer to the start of the book, the character named Kat actually gets offered something by one of the headrunners of the GIA, and the GIA is what these characters are pitted against in this book. So Kat gets offered a deal to betray her crew, and Kat is actually in love with the main character Tyler, or Ty as we know him in this book, and he is the one who found Aurora. So I thought she'd go down the road of being jealous and betraying everyone to get back at Ty liking Aurora, but I'm really glad that it didn't do that, because pitting girls against girls is one of my major frustrations in books, and Amy and Jay are very aware of that and they tend not to do that, so I wasn't particularly worried, but I did clock that it might happen. I'm just really glad that it didn't. That said though, the way that Kat resolved betraying everybody, she didn't go ahead with it, but she did discuss it off the page with the crew, so that the reader wasn't savvy to it, but the crew were. So when all of that was going down and was linked in with the robbery and the potential capture of the crew so they could be killed, they could get out of it because Kat had told everybody what was potentially going to happen so they could plan ahead for it. But in that brief discussion and back and forth of the reader catching up with what Kat had discussed, I don't think there was any clarification of whether Kat had told Ty her feelings for him and that she still loves him. It wasn't clear that she'd talked deeply with him, and I thought that was one of the reasons that were the key drivers behind why she would potentially betray everybody. So I thought it was a fairly key thing to leave out unless it's going to be revisited later, and I don't know if that can necessarily be revisited later because I'll talk about the ending shortly. Okay, so I'm now going to jump out of the few things that I disliked into the things that I really enjoyed about this book. There was a classic scene that is a subversion of tropes that happened in this book. It was kind of a subversion, kind of a unique twist. So there's that trope where two characters who are kind of in a not yet trusting / love-hate relationship going in for a mission and then getting caught by some guards and then pretending that they have to be in a romantic relationship, or lovers getting a secret kiss in before they have to go back to whatever event they're with. And they do that to avoid detection that they're imposters by the guards. And the guards kind of just go, oh, okay, I'll leave you to it, and then leave because they're embarrassed. That happened in this book, but the fact that it was Ty and the elfish character Cal just made my day. It was so wholesome and it was also so funny at the same time, and this kind of broke the ice with the characters of Ty and Cal, and it made me really like them that much more because there was a moment of hilarity and vulnerability and a lot of humour involved as well, and I think the dynamic of that really clicked me over into loving their characters as opposed to just being interested in them like I was with a few of the perspectives in this book. I didn't dislike any of the perspectives in this, I just wanted more from them, but I feel like that's going to happen across the other books in the series, so I can't really be too picky with that yet, but I like the groundwork that has been built with Ty, Cal and Ori. I also like that I expected Ty and Aurora to be set up as love interests, but that didn't really happen. They were set up as being interested in each other, and Aurora is definitely attracted to Ty, but it was more of a laying the foundations of getting to know each other and building that trust, and Aurora kind of has another hang up that is with Cal, so I like that that kind of threw off the way I'd perceive a relationship developing between Ty and Aurora. I like that that wasn't an expectation that Jay and Amy stuck with. I like that it's something that they played with. And going a little bit further into Aurora and Cal, I like that even though it wasn't talked about for the first 2/3 of the book, I like that in the last third, Cal actually acknowledged what was going on with him and talked directly to Aurora about the fact that some weird mating instinct with his kind had sparked in him about Aurora even though he didn't really know her and that she wasn't his species. I liked that he brought it up. I like that he addressed it with her directly rather than kind of skirting around it and letting her make assumptions about him. I hate miscommunication in a young adult book, and Jay and Amy avoided that with that conversation, and that's something that I really admire them for. Also, just talking about characters still, I really enjoyed that I understood the different scope of our main characters. All of them had unique backgrounds and unique races and unique choices and voices to them. So I could actually follow who was talking at the beginning of each chapter. Obviously it helped that there was a name at the beginning of each chapter, but if there wasn't, I feel like I could figure it out within the first page, and that is always a good sign. Going to the planet at the very end, I found the tensions really spiked, and I'm really glad that all of the unique voices and characters in this really stuck out to me, because otherwise in this last kind of act of the book, they all would have kind of blended together and I wouldn't have been as interested or invested in the action that was actually going down. I love that Amy and Jay have taken that insect/fungi thing in nature in our real world and adapted it to a sci-fi nature in this book with real people. It gives them kind of a plant zombie effect with all of their minds being unified, and that is really horrific and creepy to me, and as much as it creeps me out, I really loved reading about it too. Also, the fact that Amy and Jay ended this in a very emotional, hard-hitting way made me really respect them. When Kat got infected with this weird plant fungus thing, there was a lot of will they won't they with Amy and Jay potentially killing her off, and there were a few instances of like, oh, she's going to be saved, okay, they're getting her to a safe place, oh wait, no they can't, this and this have roadblocked them, they can't do that anymore, so what's going to happen? She just keeps getting sicker and sicker. And I like that they went down the hard route rather than the easy one, and they ended up killing her off. Well, I say that they killed her off, but I think they've left it open potentially for her to come back. I hope that she did get killed off though, killed off in the sense that her mind was overtaken by the fungi things, which are all of like a hive mind, rather than having Kat's individuality left. So technically her body still exists as far as I believe, but her mind doesn't. So she's not Kat anymore, even though she looks like it. This makes what I talked about before an ultimate tragedy, because if Kat was going to betray everyone and then divulge the fact that she was offered a price to betray everyone and then didn't tell Ty in that moment that she still loved him, that would be the ultimate tragedy for his character as well, because he would always be left wondering. She would never get to close that chapter of her life, and it's just very sad. As a result, I'm really interested to see how the dynamic of losing a crewmate is going to affect everybody as a ripple effect in the next book, especially Ty and especially Aurora, because they seem to be the key characters that were kind of connected to Kat, as well as Ty's sister Scarlet, which I saw enough of to really like. She's such a fighter, but she's such a girly girl too, and I'm on board with her character, but I don't really know what decisions she potentially make yet. And I'm just really glad that this was such a bold choice that Amy and Jay stuck with. Hopefully they stuck with it. I guess we'll find out in book 2. But I see a lot of YA going to that particular cliff edge of, oh, we're going to kill off your favourite character, and then I don't really understand the direness of the situation because it's YA, and a lot of the time the character gets within the cusp of death or dies and then gets brought back. And so I don't really believe the seriousness and the tension of it. But in this, Amy and Jay really excelled, and that's one of the key things that I really loved about this book. And so in conclusion, I just want to mention one more little plot thing. And I actually predicted that Aura's dad was the head kind of fungi monster thing. I saw that coming, because how else are you going to account for the fact that her entire civilization and her entire colony just disappeared and she was the only one left in cryo sleep? How was that going to be possible without revisiting them in some kind of sense? And them being the primary hosts, or that's my assumption of it, I assume that they landed on the planet to investigate and then got taken by these parasites, but I kind of assumed that we'd see her dad come back because she mentioned him intermittently going back into her memory over the course of the book, so it wouldn't have made any sense not to mention him in the conclusion. Something as big as losing her entire civilization and her entire family can't just disappear into the plot, and that's why I predicted that it would come back in the conclusion. As for characters though, I really trust and am on board with Ty, Cal, and Aurora, and characters that I really like but want to see more of are definitely Finn. He does have a vulnerable spot, but he hides it quite well with humour, and I'm a sucker for those kinds of characters, so I'm keen to see his development alongside Scarlet, which is Ty's sister. We see a little bit of her, like I said, but not enough to kind of grasp who she is. And then Zilla is another character that we barely hear from at all, but she's quite a quiet character anyway. She's got really short chapters that are barely a paragraph long because she just doesn't really talk much, but she does add a one-liner every now and then, and usually an intelligent one-liner out of left field that really helps the team. So I'm keen to see what her backstory is as well. In addition to all that, I'm really interested to see the different magic in this book, because it kind of was mentioned, but the way that characters travel in this book is through the rifting, which is when the ship basically is kind of like a wormhole, but not. They disappear from one place into this parallel zone and then they re-emerge somewhere else that's further away. So it's kind of a method of travel, but if you spend too long in it, then you end up getting messed with in your head and you start getting visions and you start going crazy. And because Aurora was in cryosleep for so long, she was in the rifting so long, and that's why she gets these visions throughout the course of the book, but you're not quite sure where these visions are coming from or who's manipulating them or how they're being projected into her head and if they're actually even part of her. So I'm interested to see how that gets explored, because I'm hoping it gets talked about a little bit more in the second book. Granted, there is a lot to unpack considering the conclusion, but I do hope that gets mentioned. So yes, at the beginning of this book, I thought the balance was a little bit rocky, but as it went on, the blend of humor and tension and suspense and kind of the plot unraveling as well as the characters understanding each other started to balance out, and I really ended up liking it a lot more than I thought I would. Initially, I was going to give this a 3.5 stars, and that's not a bad rating for me. 3.5 it was good and I enjoyed it. I'd probably recommend it, but it's not going to be something that I get hyped up about or something that I necessarily am the first to recommend. But after reading the last half or the last 2/3, I've bumped this up to a 4 out of 5 star rating. Because of all of the things that I mentioned that I liked about this really brought the rating up for me, and like I said, I am interested in continuing the series. And there you go, that is my book talk on Aurora Rising. Let me know if you've read this book, let me know what your rating was in the comments. I'd love to hear from you and I'll chat to you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye.